Here's game 2 of the Women's World Championship final between Wenjun, the current champion, and the challenger Lei Tingjie. So it's taking place in Shanghai. 12-game match. The first game was drawn. Lei had chances to press in that first game, but rather squandered them actually, but certainly wasn't easy. So Wenjun playing white in the second game, and she has opened with d4. That's normally the move that she goes for. Does play e4 occasionally, but basically she's a d4 player. Now in that first game we saw a super solid Berlin variation of the Spanish, and we have another very solid variation, the so-called semi-Tarrasch, or well, it could be a Tarrasch. This continuation, I would guess this would be played, is the so-called semi-Tarrasch. And this has been very popular over the last few years because black is able to exchange off a lot of pieces, and that kind of takes the pressure off straight away. Black still has to equalise that position because white has a nice space advantage with the pawns. Nevertheless, very reliable line for black. So instead of exchanging, Zhu plays e3, which is what just keeps more tension in the position. Knight c6, and then c takes d5, e takes d5, and bishop b5. So, okay, this is a pretty well-known continuation. But after pawn takes pawn, if white wants to sort of keep maybe a bit more juice in the position, you can play knight takes and play against this isolated pawn. Although, black should be fine in those positions. But instead, Zhu plays e takes d4. So we have a symmetrical pawn structure, but white has an extra move. But it's hard to squeeze anything from this position. Well, let's see what happened. Bishop d6. Okay, that's good move. Bishop on a good diagonal. Both sides castle, and bishop g5. Well, that attempts to exploit the fact that this bishop has moved to d6 and it's not on e7. So there's a pin here. But bishop g4, that's kind of the same story. There's a nice pin here and threatening to take on d4. So bishop e2, well, that feels like a big compromise to have to move the bishop back again. But because of the threat to the d-pawn, or potential threat to the d-pawn after bishop f6, then black compromises and bishop e6 played. So the bishop retreats from g4 to protect the pawn on d5. So rook e1. So tight manoeuvring in this position. There are no pawn breaks here. It's all about these outposts actually. Can you land a piece successfully on e5 or e4, or potentially c4 and c5 as well? h6. Now, if you exchange, then forget about trying for an advantage for white. Black is absolutely fine. I mean, the only way to try and get something from the position is to play bishop h4, maintaining that pin. Now, how does black deal with that? Rook c8. Okay, good move. So these open files, obviously really important in this symmetrical position. a3. So why is that being played? Well, sometimes it can be nice to put that bishop to d3 and you don't want to be hassled by a knight. And rook e8, okay, looks pretty normal. The rook moves to the open file. And now bishop b5. Okay, that's an interesting move. So the bishop switches back again. Certainly bishop g4 isn't going to be an issue here because there are problems here for black. And now Lei plays a6. That's a surprising move to my eyes. I like g5. you know, this is the classic way to get rid of this pin, to break this pin. And although it does look a little bit scary to advance the pawn in front of the king, in this position, I just don't think there's an issue at all. So bishop g4, for example, you know, this looks absolutely fine for black. You know, there are potentially issues here. I mean, it's not really possible to exploit the slight looseness of the pawn advance here. I mean, this is very typical. I mean, this kind of advance, I know from other, well, similar positions. There's a line that I've often played against the Alapin. E4, that is, okay, let's go right back to the beginning. E4, C5, and then I like to play with E6 and go for this isolated queen's pawn position. And very often you get, at some point, a pin here, but you can drive it back with H6 and G5 and throw a knight on E4. If you know my anti-Sicilians course, you'll recognise this strategy. And there are, you know, real similarities between the positions. So yeah, I think G5 is the typical move in this position, and actually there's no need to be worried about this advance. But Lei played A6, and that looks like a mistake to me. Hitting the bishop. And here I think this should just be taken. If rook takes, there are problems with this pin. And you certainly don't want to damage your kingside pawns. That doesn't look advisable. And after pawn takes, that's probably the best move. Well, white just has more freedom here. So the queen stands well on d3, attacks that one. Okay, let's say a5. Now just doubling on the e file. Rook e2, followed by rook e1, and yeah, potentially putting the knight on e5. Don't forget that one, knight a4 as well. Just feels more comfortable for white. So bishop a4, that comes as a bit of a surprise. Now, Zhu is looking to play the bishop back to c2 to guess on this diagonal, but there isn't really any danger there. And Lei takes the initiative. b5 and g5. This could have been played not just in the position that I was advocating this move previously, but actually on several turns this was possible, and it's certainly a good idea here again. So the bishop goes back. The sacrifice is nothing. It's never going to work. Basically, black's pieces are too well set up. So bishop g3, exchange, and queen b6. And this is certainly more pleasant for black. The king is not in any danger. Sits nicely on the king's side. There's potentially pressure here. The queen has found a good square. The rooks are connected. Queen d2, and here, excellent move. Bishop g4. So there's pressure on the knight, and that means there's pressure on the pawn on d4. So Zhu exchanged on e8. Now there's a threat to exchange and take this pawn, so rook d1. Now Lei played a kind of slightly safety first move, actually. She moved the king to f8. You know, I wonder whether she was concerned about a potential sacrifice here. In fact, she could have played knight a5. So this is typical classical chess where you want to hit the outpost. You know, these squares here, e4 and c4, that's the outpost. Put a knight on c4 and the knight hits the queen, hits the pawn. You know, that's already very irritating. And if b3 covering, then of course that weakens the position of the knight. Rook c8, that feels a bit uncomfortable when you've got two pieces on that open c file. So I think knight a5 was the move, but okay, king f8 is a safe move. It means, you know, you're not going to be troubled by a sacrifice. But okay, queen d3. Well, there's nothing really going on here. The knight is fine. Knight covers. And I think knight a5 again looks like a very tempting move. So typical of this very, very classical position. But b4 played. So knight a4 attacks the queen and queen b5. So this is still better for black. Black has just a little bit of initiative here because of a bit of pressure here and on the pawn on d4. Pawn takes pawn, an exchange of queens, and knight b4. So that knight has found a good spot. Attacking these two, rook d2. Now knight d7 prevents this knight coming into c5, or I should say discourages the knight from coming into c5. Yeah, I mean, let me see. Here, bishop b3 was played. I assume this isn't very good. Yeah, looks loose. Exchange and rook c8. Yeah, that looks like it's picking up the c-pawn. Okay, so knight d7 certainly discouraged this knight from hitting the outpost. Pity to go backwards, but hey, that's life. You also discourage knight e5 as well. So bishop b3. And here bishop f5 was played. I think this was also perhaps a moment where Lei could have just squeezed the position a little bit. There was potential with this continuation. An exchange on f3, rook e1 check. So the rook is nice and active. And now bringing the king into the middle. I think once the king reaches d6, covering the d5 pawn, then black looks very solid. Then that gives the knight a little bit more freedom. The rook is very active. I think crucially, it's not easy for that king to get into the game. That just feels more comfortable for black. And as I said, there's perhaps potential to squeeze something out of that position. You can see that. I mean, basically, white's pieces are quite restricted there. It's interesting. We saw this maneuver in a variation in the first game where Wenjun could have done this in a particular variation. Do check out that video. But yeah, this feels like a very natural continuation for black. But instead, bishop f5 was played. Knight c3. So a little bit of pressure here. I guess it's possible to defend that, but still, I don't know, this feels quite nice now that there's pressure here. Instead, g4 was played. Now, if the knight goes to the side, then certainly this looks very comfortable for black. The king is poor. The knight is poor at the edge of the board. But instead, knight e5 was a simple solution. So this forces exchanges. And then knight takes. And the position very quickly liquidates to a draw. I mean, it's clear that neither side has any kind of advantage here. And this is how the game finished. Rook d4, king g7. The rook switched across to attack this one, but then rook e5 attacks the bishop. If rook takes pawn, then bishop e6 wins material because of the pin. So rook d4, and the rook went back again, and the rook went to the side, and the rook came back again. And in this position, well, that's threefold repetition. So a draw. So two draws. so far in the match, Lei Tingjie has had the better of both games. I think, maybe if this were later on in the match, then she might have had more confidence to press for the win, to try something in these positions. She certainly had potential in both these games to play for the win, but she looked a little bit too satisfied with playing these draws against the champion. But they are rated about the same, actually. So it's been a tense start to the World Championship match. I'm going to dip in to the match now and again. I hope I'll be able to cover all the games. But yeah, depending on what's happening, what else is happening elsewhere, I might just dip in and check out what's going on in the match. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed those. If you're not a subscriber to the channel, do hit the subscribe button. I'm almost at 100k. I'm going to get there one day. Thanks for watching.